Welcome to our game today from 2011 where 16-year-old Anish Giri, after playing a rather brilliant move, opened up some tactical possibilities and forced Magnus Carlsen into a position where he played a blunder and ended up beating Carlsen for the very first time in a classical match in just 22 moves. Such was the calamitous play by Magnus that Anish said that he wouldn't expect Magnus to lose a game like this for another 10 years. And of course, Giri didn't go on to beat Carlsen in a classical game for another 12 years. But in the game, we got d4, knight f6, c4, g6 by Giri playing with the black pieces. Carlsen plays g3. We get bishop g7, bishop g2. After d5 by Giri, c takes d5, knight takes d5, knight f3, knight b6, knight c3, and knight to c6. Now, this is the King's Indian defense. Also, if you ever play the Alekhines defense, maybe you're used to having your two knights over this side on the queen side. But in this position, Giri, of course, has now got three attackers versus two defenders for Carlsen. So Carlsen plays e3 to protect the pawn. So we get castles by Giri, castles by Carlsen. We get rook e8 and then rook e1 by Magnus. Now there's a rather interesting line here. If Magnus instead had played d5, well then we would get a5, and after knight to d7, d4 and bishop to d7, we get e4, protecting the pawns. So we've got connected pawns in the middle of the board. So Magnus would have been very happy with these long-term prospects here. We have e4 by Giri, and after d takes c6, knight takes c6, knight takes c6, and bishop takes c6. It would actually be a bad mistake here for Magnus to trade off the queens. Of course, now Giri would have a very promising position, controlling the open file on the d file. Knight is jumping in here to c4. We've got the bishops with targets as well. So this would be a great position for black. In fact, in this position, the computer wants white to play queen to b3. So certainly a very interesting line if it had come to that, but instead in the game, as we saw, we got rook to e1 by Magnus, then a5 by Giri, queen to d2, which is not the best move by Magnus, and it gets e5 by Anish. We get d5 by Magnus, attacking the knight and opening up the possibility of the queen's trade. So instead we get knight to b4. So we get knight to b4, we've got two attackers, or two defenders, three attackers. So we get Magnus playing e4, connecting the pawns as in the other line. So we get c6 as similar as last time, and this time we get the attack by Magnus of a3. So Magnus not allowing the trade-off of the pawns, or if he takes, of course, now the knight can't jump back because a3 is played. And it's in this position that Anish plays a brilliant move that ends up with him winning the game because of the complications of the position. So can you find a brilliant move that Anish played here? Well, the brilliant move is c takes d5, giving up your knight. Why does Anish do this? Well, after a takes b4 and a takes b4, we now find ourselves in a situation where Magnus is got his rook attacked by Anish's rook. He's got a knight attacked by a pawn, and this pawn is also hanging. So Magnus has to take the rook here because he can't protect it. So he can't protect all of the attacking situation. Of course, he could drop the knight back here, but of course that would make it a very dim situation because then after you play the pawn push here, the knight would then be lost. So we get Magnus playing rook takes a8, and here Anish plays. What would you play here? If you're looking for an intermezzo move, well, that's right, it's b takes c3. Now he takes the knight. Of course, Magnus has to take back this pawn, or he would lose his queen, and then Anish takes the rook back here. So now Anish is up a pawn. What can we see? Well, then Magnus gets the pawn back. He plays e to d5. We get knight to b6, of course, attacking. And it's in this position that Magnus, he falls apart in the next two moves, basically. First of all, he plays rook to d1, which is a mistake. And then we get the very nice enterprising move by Anish of e4. So e4, a very good move here, and this leads to a catastrophic blunder by Magnus where he actually drops a piece in his next move. Can you see why? Why is knight to g5 a blunder? Well, it's a blunder here because we play e3. Now e3 means that the queen is no longer protecting the knight. So now Giri is attacking it. If you play something like f takes, well then very simply we get queen takes, and in the game we actually get b2, queen to b2 by Magnus, saying, well, if you take mine, I'll take yours. Seems like a fair enough exchange. And in the game we get queen takes g5, and then we get bishop to e3. Now, first of all, let's just imagine for a moment here, after queen g5, there's actually a better move for Anish taking the knight here. And it starts off with this move of knight to a4. Of course, now we've got a double attack on the pawn. You're also attacking the queen. So Magnus would have to respond by queen to b2. After knight to c3, we'd get bishop to e3. Then the computer actually says to give up the rook with knight to d1. And we have these crazy lines, a couple of crazy lines here. We get knight to f7, king takes, pawn pushes, then with the check by Magnus. Computer says to block with the rook and now take back the knight with the queen. And then after queen d6, black is still completely winning in this position. Also, another position that could have been played here is you could have played queen to d1 straight away, and then after, this is a great move, isn't it? We get rook takes on e3 is what the computer wants, because now you can take the knight and you get two pieces for the rook, and again you're completely winning in this position. But in the game, Anish went for the rather simplified queen to g5, and then we get bishop to e3. Anish obviously had calculated that if Magnus had played indeed takes here on queen takes b6, we would get e2 attacking the rook, and then after rook to e1, can you find the killer move in this position? This is a beautiful move. It's queen to c1, taking the bishop with the queen. After you take the queen back, you you don't castle. In fact, you promote to a queen. After rook takes, check. Look at this for a move. Bishop to h3, threatening checkmate. So now Magnus would have to go back to b5 to cover up here on the diagonal. But after bishop takes, queen takes, you then play this lovely move here of bishop takes on c3, protecting the rook. The king can't go walking because you would lose the queen for free. And basically, we've got this pawn pushing up the board. We've also got black's king coming in to capture this pawn as well. But in the game, after bishop to e3 was played, after this, Anish played queen to g4, attacking the rook that was left hanging, and that means Magnus would have to go back to protect it and would lose out on getting this piece that he would wanted. So in this position, he just totally resigned. So a wonderful victory for 16-year-old Anish Giri.